We look at two self-portraits from 1880, and we really do see two different perspectives of what he's looking at. At the left, it looks a little bit more realistic, and on the right, you can see that he's even looking at himself in the idea of form and shape, and there's even a little bit of discontinuity between the left side and right side of his face. And in addition to this, he's incorporating these brush strokes, the development of little planar areas, like we were seeing a little bit before with his landscape paintings. Again, it's the fusion of all of these kind of concepts together that lead us forward, but it's not just that. We're starting to see aspects of localized color, as they say, colors that don't necessarily belong. We usually associate that with Matisse. Now, when we look in again at the concept of the bathers, he revisits this painting concept again in 1882. We can see he's getting a little bit closer in terms of anatomy, but it's a very, very similar composition to the three bathers that we saw from 1875. Very distinctly, if we look, we can see how he's developing the trees in the background, again with those brush strokes, and he's really developing, there's a little bit more of a separation, if you will, with the people, with the landscape itself, but again, we're looking at these people almost as a collection of objects. The woman in the corner, we wonder if she's looking forward or if she's looking actually back towards us, and we can very easily see how it influenced Picasso later on. So we return to Lestock, and in 1880 he moves his studio there, and he paints the coast, and if you look at this, we see these geometric shapes in the form of the buildings, these flat plains, but we also have the water being this blue plain behind it as well. He's using complementary colors, the blue and the orange is really shining each other, setting each other off, if you will. Again, as we proceed through Cezanne's life, Paul Cezanne's life, he begins to move his studio more and more to more and more isolated locations, looking for isolation in order to paint these compositions. Even later on in his life, when he has a little bit more freedom, we see this occurring. We look in at 1886, and 1886 is the beginning of kind of a rougher period. We have a portrait from Madame Cezanne. In 1886, he marries Hortense, and they're officially man and wife. It's the same year that his father dies. In 1888, we move him to Jardin des Buffons. But eventually what happens is she actually moves to Paris with their son, and this is kind of the separation that we have. We also have in 1888 the ending of his lifelong friendship with Émile Zola. Émile Zola writes a book that features a character that very much is Cezanne, kind of describes him as being obsessed with nature and a little bit insane, and of course having a mistress and a son, and at the end of the book he kills himself. So this has a profound effect on Cezanne. Again, we return to the idea of the larger bather paintings. This time we check in 1887 from the previous composition that we've seen from 1880. And again, here we look at the treatment of the body and the forms that he's really creating. They're very, very planar in nature, developed by a series of planes. When we look at the woman's body that's closest to us, it almost seems like it's one flat plane that goes all the way from the bottom of her foot all the way up to her neck. We see him using, again, this variety of brushstrokes in order to differentiate patterns of objects. And again, when we look at this, we can start to see the separation of these forms within the women. We return to Saint Victoire here. And again, this is an incredibly important area for him to paint. He paints this mountain over 60 times throughout his life. When we look at the tiny example of a composition that I have on the left, this is an important aspect too, is that he's starting to manipulate his compositions to really make something out of it. If we look at how the tree branches very much echo the line of Saint Victoire itself, again, it's very questionable that he found a tree branch that very much followed that exact arc and was able to place it there, that he might have manipulated it somehow in his mind. If we look at the painting on the left to the right, it's almost as if we've walked along a few paces, if not maybe a short distance, and painted again. From 1887, we check in on our couple here, and again, as we move farther and farther down the road, their relationship becomes more and more skewed. At one point, they travel to Switzerland together to kind of try to reunite each other, but at the end of it, she returns to Paris, and he returns to the south to kind of continue to paint. We know that she periodically will check in on him or come and visit him, and we continue to have these portraits of her painted as time progresses. We will also notice on the portrait on the left, he's starting to leave a little bit more open space and let the volume kind of develop itself, rather than just developing strictly through a series of combinations. Again, as we see these people kind of aging and progressing, their lives are strained. So when we look again at his compositions that he's doing from 1887, this is really one of the other major points we get from Cezanne. Specifically, when we look on the right, it's very easy to see. When we look at the plate of the cherries and the plate of the other fruit, we really are looking at these from two completely different vantage points. And it's thought that he either essentially moves the canvas around. I've also heard the theory that he would prop up these plates from different positions using coins and different objects to get the best vantage point he possibly could. But again, the idea is that he's really starting to separate compositions and not rely strictly on reality as we would perceive it, but what can be thought of as the best possible angle for objects. In 1890, we know that he has developed diabetes, and again, this will affect him for the rest of his life. He was very, very short in temper before, but after 1890, he becomes very, very difficult to be around, and even more impossible, if you will. We return to the idea of the four bathers, and in this, again, we start to see really what I think his idea really was about this kind of fusion, if you will, between these elements and the landscape themselves. We look at the planar elements of the trees, and we notice the objects that he's kind of creating into these forms that we think of as people. We have this woman facing us, and we have a very rare glimpse at the person's face, if you will. Here are two other compositions, one done in 1895, Woman with a Coffee Pot, and Boy in a Red Vest from 1890. The boy in the red vest is famous because this is a professional sitter. This is Cezanne actually hiring someone to come in and sit for him. Again, it was mentioned before, he was very famous for having these very prolonged sitting periods where he would need up to 150 sittings to really capture a portrait of someone, and they would have to remain almost hairlessly still, if you will, in order for him to do it. When we look at the portrait on the right, again, we wonder if Cezanne isn't playing around with that same concept, that the child's eye is very far over there. We return to a portrait of Madame Cezanne from 1890, and again, you know, despite the fact that they were somewhat separated, if you will, not living together, he continues to paint her, and she continues to sit for him. Here again, these are these later periods where, if you look at her clothing, you can see this introduction of green within the blue, and he's examining color, and we start to see this color also manifesting itself just slightly within her face. Again, this is when he's bringing together all of his innovations into kind of one set of thinking, if you will. And we look at these portraits, and these have been remarked upon, that these have kind of this informal nature to them, that they have almost a separation, if you will, from emotion. Here we have another portrait of his wife, and a portrait of their son Paul. And again, I'm not sure that this is, at least in my mind, very true. I do see a lot of emotion in these portraits. It's just not, it's not blatant, but I do feel he felt quite a bit for these people, and in particular his son. We do hear towards the end of his life, he developed a phobia of being touched by people, even to the point that he wouldn't let his son touch him. But I still feel that there was some connection there. But when we do look at this, we do see this idea of form overtaking composition. We see his head shifting its way almost to becoming an orb or a sphere rather than being a person's face. Here we have a self-portrait from 1890 and a portrait just of a person, if you will, from 1892. Towards the end of this kind of period of his painting, he starts to paint peasants, if you will, or at least the idea of peasants within his studio, looking at the self-portrait, looking at the flatness of the palette in connection to the plane of the canvas surface. Again, this is one of the greater ideas with Cezanne, is that he is one of the first artists to truly appreciate that we are looking at a flat surface when we're looking at a canvas, and the manipulation of that flat surface is really what the painting is, and the two-dimensionality of that in terms of the composition, that it almost looks like a flat rectangle, is really kind of amazing. We have the Card Players from 1892, a series of these kind of subgenre paintings he does of what is thought of as ordinary people. Again, when you look at these compositions, there's a lot of repetition of where people are sitting, and the angles of forms and that type of thing. My particular favorite point of this painting is that if you look on the back wall, there's this pipe rack where I imagine individuals who would be locals would hang their pipe at the end of the day and retrieve it when they went to this location. But again, his idea of focusing in almost on a Courbet-esque aesthetic, if you will, the idea of capturing the everyday people that he might see around him in this rural province. Another one of these compositions, again, the man with the hat and the pipe, we've kind of noticed from the previous composition as well. Again, just the idea of capturing the locals, but when we look at this is as much about composition as it is about the people. If you notice the very, very strong use of regular lines, or straight lines, if you will, in the background, and then forming these verticals in comparison to the horizontals, and then we have the repetition of that horizontal again on the tabletop itself. This is really a form of balance within the composition. You have either man on either side, and let it be no wonder that one man is dressed in dark colors while the other man is dressed in light colors. We're looking at this as a form of composition as much as anything. Here we have Mont Saint-Victoire again, and also a portrait of Madame Cezanne in a green hat. And again, when we look at this, this is really a forerunner to the work of both Matisse and also Picasso, especially when you look at the left. One almost is reminded of Picasso's famous portrait of Gertrude Stein. But again, this use of localized color, this breaking up of objects into planes and shapes, and the using of brushstrokes to create those planes. We see this in both of the objects. And Mont Saint-Victoire, again, as his life continues, this becomes more and more a focus of his work, as it was. Again, we have to remember he saw this from a very, very early on